Welcome back. Today we're doing rear brakes and rotors on an '08 Ford Taurus. I already have the wheel off, and the video will actually be on the other side. I kind of had a second thought on this. We're going to tell you what you need. So first thing is brake clean and anti-seize. Get them at your parts stores. Brake clean is to clean up the rotors, always needed. You can get by without the anti-seize, but I always use it. Next thing is a torque wrench. You're torquing your lug nuts, you're gonna need a torque wrench. So now we have a 19mm socket. That's for your lug nuts. They're 19mm on this with an extension. Extension's not needed, but it gets you out past the wheel, so you know it's nice to have. A 19mm is 1/2" drive. Always use 1/2" drive on lug nuts. You can get by with 3/8, but the 1/2" really helps. Now we have a extendable ratchet here. Main thing you're looking for is the long handle. Long handle will help you break the lug nuts loose. The 3/8 drive ratchet, 3/8 drive extension, brake caliper retracting tool, that'll be covered a little bit later here, a T40 Torx bit, 14 and 15mm wrench or socket. You will need the wrench to safely access the bolts for the caliper to caliper mounting bracket, or caliper to slide pin bolts. You will want to have a wrench for that. You can get away with a socket on the 15, but you want to have a wrench in this case to do the 14mm bolts. Some sources are telling me it's a 13. I tried a 13, it did not fit. So we're covering a 14. And next thing is a pry bar or screwdriver that you don't care about to remove the brake caliper. This one is a designated screwdriver. I paid a couple bucks for it. That I actually only use for prying. So too cheap to buy a set of pry bars all the time. Kept breaking them. Screwdrivers wind up being cheaper in this case. And last thing finally is a block of wood. As you can see, I already have this partially disassembled to give a better view of what's going on here. So you obviously have your lug nuts, those come off, then you'll see the rotor. And the rotor sits on the hub. Lug nuts go through these holes. These tapered holes, one of them will have a little retaining bolt in. That retaining bolt will actually hold the rotor on. It is a T40 Torx is what you're going to need to get that off. So you take the retaining bolt off, the rotor can then be removed from the hub. So take off your lug nut studs, take off your lug nuts, take your wheel off, take the retaining bolt here out. There's a good view of what it looks like. This one's pretty chewed up inside. And the Ford dealer says, oh yeah, we just we just don't replace those, we just throw them out. Well, lug nuts are torqued right, I guess, yeah, it works. Why they usually put these on there is so if your wheel falls off, you still have braking abilities to some extent, I guess. So that being said, no, it's not needed for the car to function. This one is pretty messed up, and this is my daily driver, not a paying job. So since the dealer don't have them and they don't use them, I still have to debate if I'm going to put it back in loosely and hope it does what it's supposed to do, or if I just remove it and throw it away. These are usually really hard to get out. Thankfully, Ford used the Torx here versus the Volkswagen style with a plus head, Phillips head type of bit, because those usually seize up and they're almost impossible to get out. So after that, you can remove your caliper mounting bolts, one here and one on the bottom in the same location, and then your caliper bracket mounting bolts, again, one here and one in the bottom in the same location. Once you remove those bolts, the caliper comes off, the bracket comes off. You use your pry bar right in here to pry the caliper off before you remove the bracket. That'll have the pad slide out. You can see this pad is pretty worn down. There's barely anything left. And they want to put that rivet in there. I would have been able to save this rotor, but there's a rivet in there, and you can see it coming through from the back side. So now I'm replacing rotors too on this one. So what we're going to go ahead and do next in this case is you're going to compress the caliper piston. You can see it in there. It has 2 little notches on it. Those are going to match up with this specialty tool. It's a little cube with notches all over it. Goes into 3/8 drive socket, or in this case 3/8 drive ratchet or extension. I'm using the extension just for access. The one you want to use looks like that in this case, but it has a whole bunch of different other patterns: little dots, big dots, 4 diamonds, and then there's a narrower circular kind of pattern there. So it has pretty much everything you're going to need as far as compressing any piston, but this case we're using that one right there. These curved pieces here, each little protrusion will go into those matching indents on the face of the piston. Now, this setup you have to push and turn. So I have mounted the caliper back in place onto the bracket, which will hold up the braking force. It'll hold up to you trying to compress it. And then we have a block of wood back here to keep the slide pins from sliding the whole way out. It's not tight, it's fairly loose. Not too much force is needed, but you're not holding it with one hand, twisting it with the other. It takes a little bit of coordination to keep that little tool on these little notches in the face of the piston. So we've already retracted this one. Since it takes 2 hands and it's kind of hard, I don't have a tripod. I'm not going to show you how it's done, but this one here was lefty-loosey to retract it. So you're going counterclockwise to retract this one. I'm going to check the other one here and make a note of it if the other one is going to be the same direction or the opposite direction. So we're going to get back on this. I'm going to get everything taken back apart, get these bolts here and these bolts here out, and then we're going to get everything off. We're going to lube it back up and put it back together. Stay tuned. Alright, so we're back with everything taken back apart, as you can see. Now I have the caliper mounting bracket sitting here. Couple things to check while you're have this out. This one's fairly clean. The hardware's in decent shape. I have to put this one piece back on right, but hardware shouldn't have any problems holding the pads. So what you want to do is you want to make sure these slide pins will move freely. This one's hanging up a good bit, and this one moves really well. So since this one moves really well, we're going to pop it out quick and take a look. You can see there's plenty of grease on it. It's well lubed. They make high temp brake grease for this, or I just use anti-seize. Anti-seize is nice to have around. It's always easy to come by. You can buy it in the nice big Permatex bottles, and it comes in handy. So I usually keep that around and use that. This other one is not moving quite as easily, so we're going to pull it out and see what's going on. You can already see it's not near as much grease on this one. So I will be re-greasing this one, putting more grease on it, working it around a little bit, put it back in. You want to make sure these boots are all in good shape, no rips or tears. And you want to make sure that those clips are all in good shape too. These clips will retain your pads. So make sure they're in good shape. There's no bends, no high wear marks or anything like that. Now, next step to do after you clean it up is go ahead and put a little bit of your anti-seize or your brake lubricant also on these areas here of the stainless steel clip where the pad will actually ride. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow the pad to move back and forth without any issues. So we're going to go ahead and get that all done, get this bracket back on the car, put the pads in, and go on to the next step. Okay, and now we have the rotor on. Nice shiny new rotor, smothered in brake cleaner. Like the red stuff, don't use it in a hole in the ground, it will kill you. This is heavier than air, so make sure you're in a well ventilated area. But the red stuff, it'll clean almost anything, and I've used this to clean oil off of firewalls and you know, grease off of the chassis and everything else. So yeah, very good cleaner. A little more expensive for the red stuff, but I definitely like it. So the rotor's on. It's been hit with hit with brake clean really good, both sides. Make sure you get the wear surface there. And here's your hat. That's what this part's called. The non-wear surface is your hat. A lot of the time you can go ahead and paint these. I don't bother. Usually, you know, paint's not going to really do anything other than looks. It's not going to rust through or anything before it wears down. So, have a lug nut down here, as you can see. It's just hand tight, that's it. Just enough to hold the rotor in place so I can line up the caliper bracket, which already has the 2 rear bolts, as you can see back in there. 1 and 2 are both in place and tightened down. So with the bracket on, I've greased these pins so they move better, and the rear pad is in. Now we're working on the front pad. Oh, sorry, the inner and outer pads, because they're both for the rear axle. So this setup is somewhat tricky for most people, but there's a couple little tricks for you. First of all, we'll give you the basics of brakes. You do not want to touch this wear surface here with dirty hands. Don't get any dirt on that. And the actual wear surface of the pads, don't get any dirt on them. These are the Duralast mid-grades. They have a nice hammer tone powder coated finish on there. Looks really cool. Has the anti-squeal pad here, which is really nice. However, the actual compound itself, I'm quite disappointed with. It's obviously a semi-metallic by looking at it. You see all the little sparkles in there. But it has a lot of large chunks in it, and I'll see how they work and go from there. I've ran these before on other vehicles, and they didn't have quite as large chunks in it. It's probably specially formulated for this car. It is all-wheel drive and all that stuff. So, but a little tip for putting them in is you go ahead and you slide it in at about a 45-degree angle. And then if you watch the bottom, you can see that clip there. And when you slide it in, I'll try not to block the camera's view. At a 45-degree angle, you can go ahead and just push them into place. There we go. You see, you just go ahead and push them into place. So now you can see where we lubricated top and bottom, inner and outer, on those clips where this pad slides. And you can see the pad moves with barely any effort. So that's going to allow your caliper to float and move around like it should without any problems whatsoever. One thing I did want to mention is when you take your calipers off, do not hang them by the hose. Make sure they're slack in the hose. If you hang it by the hose, you can damage the hose. If you drop it and it winds up hanging by the hose, again, you could damage the hose. So something to consider if you have spongy feeling brakes afterwards. That could be a potential problem there. Your hose is swelling up. And you can actually see them swell when they do swell. Now, one more thing before we put the caliper back on is those notches there that we use to screw the caliper in with. They must be at the 12 and 6 o'clock position on the caliper, or as it mounts on the car, front and back. Because you can see how that notch is going to match up with that pin on the pad right below the 17 in that part number. So you have to make sure that matches up when you put everything back together. So this one I'm going to back out just a little bit more because it is the whole way in. I'm going to back it out just a tad bit more, slide it on, put the bolts in, and get this side wrapped up. Didn't mention earlier, you also want to check to make sure this boot is in good shape. Hose your caliper down with a good bit of brake clean. They do get kind of dusty and dirty, as you can see mine is, but I will do that after everything's all together in this case. So that being said, you can go ahead and make sure the boot's in good shape here. Make sure it's not ripped, it's seated properly. A lot of the time the boot will kind of seize to the piston, and you might need to put a little force in it to break it loose when it turns. That's not anything out of the normal, but you do want to make sure that it doesn't rip in that process. We'll also throw a little bit of anti-seize on here and on the face of the piston. Now what that's going to do is that's going to give us a nice quiet brake. So you're not going to have any metal on metal without some kind of lubrication, and then it's going to make everything nice and quiet, and you won't have any squeaking and squealing as you try to slow the car down. Okay, here we are with the caliper in place, loosely bolted in. You can see this bolt here. One thing that is worthy of mention is this, if you can see it there, retaining pin has flats on the top and bottom. That is going to actually match up, you can see it a little better there, with a flat on the caliper. So make sure that flat is matching with the other one, or you're going to have a little gap, about similar to what you see here with the bolt loose. Right in here between the actual caliper and the pin. So you can also see a little damage here on this one right there, where someone caught it incorrectly at one point in time in this vehicle's life. I think this is probably only a second set of pads, maybe going on the third now. It only has 60,000 on it, but they were replaced and someone did catch it incorrectly. So one thing to remember, make sure those flats are lining up with the flat on the caliper. Then you can tighten your bolts down. Okay, now I'm wrapping up the driver's side here. The retractor, the piston and the caliper will go two different directions here. So the driver's side is going to be righty-tighty. Passenger side, lefty-loosey. So passenger side is counterclockwise, driver side is clockwise. That is crucial to know, or else you're going to wind up taking the piston out of the caliper by accident. So another thing to note while I'm wrapping up is these pads on this particular vehicle, all four are exactly the same. Most idiot-proof setup you can ever have. You cannot mess up what pad goes where. Don't worry about it. They're all four the same. So, something else to mention to you there. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to get the caliper on. I'm going to get the wheel back on over here. Put all my tools away. Get it down off the jack stands. And after that, we're going to go ahead. We're going to get in there. We're going to pump the brakes a few times. Make sure we have a good brake pedal. And we're going to take it for a test drive. So, we have everything wrapped up. If you have any questions, any comments, or if there's another video that you'd like to see, please leave a message in the comments and we can see what we can do to help you out. Thank you for watching.